Houston, Texas, January 1973. Let me take you there, right now. Because you need to feel this city before you can understand what happened inside that gym. Houston in January. Cold by Texas standards, which means nothing by anyone else's standards. 58 degrees, and the whole city acts like it's snowing. People in heavy coats, breath visible in the morning air. The kind of cold that makes everything feel more serious, more real. But inside Yates Gym on the east side of Houston, inside Yates Gym, it is not cold. It is never cold inside Yates Gym. See, Yates Gym is not a fancy place. Not one of those modern training facilities with mirrors and air conditioning and motivational posters on the wall. This is a working gym. A serious gym. Cracked concrete floor. Exposed pipes overhead. The smell of sweat and leather and liniment so deep in the walls now that you could strip the paint and it would still be there. Heavy bags that have been hit 1,000,000 times, hanging from chains that have never been replaced. Speed bags at different heights for different fighters. A regulation ring in the center canvas, worn soft from years of footwork. Corner pads retaped so many times the tape has tape on it. The windows are fogged from the heat inside. From outside you can hear it, even through the walls. The rhythmic thud of leather on leather, the sharp snap of the speed bag. The shuffle of feet on canvas, the occasional grunt of someone pushing past what they thought was their limit. This is where champions are made in Houston. This is where George Foreman trains. Now, before I tell you what happened on that January morning in 1973, you need to understand who George Foreman is. Not the George Foreman you know from the grill. Not the smiling, gentle, hat-wearing grandfather of the 1990s who everyone loves. No. The George Foreman of January 1973 is something different entirely. He is 24 years old, 6'3.5" tall, 217 pounds of the most physically intimidating human being on the planet Earth. Let me be specific about that, because people throw around words like intimidating and powerful, and they don't mean anything anymore. So let me give you specifics. His arms. When George Foreman of 1973 throws a punch, he is not throwing a punch the way other men throw punches. The weight behind it is different. The physics are different. Trainers who watched him work the heavy bag in this period experienced men. Men who had worked with dozens of professional heavyweights. They said they had never seen a human being hit anything that hard. The bag didn't swing. It compressed. Like the impact was so concentrated, so direct, that the bag had nowhere to go but inward. And his record? 37 fights. 37 wins. 34 knockouts. Sanchez, out of 37 professional fights, 34 opponents did not hear the final bell. They were unconscious before it rang. Some of them were unconscious before they fully understood what was happening. His average knockout time in 1972 was 2 rounds and 14 seconds. 2 rounds. That's it. That's all most men got. He won the Olympic gold medal in Mexico City 1968. You might remember the image young George Foreman, 19 years old, waving a small American flag in the ring after winning. That was 5 years ago. He was already physically imposing then. He is a different creature now. 6 months from this January morning, he will travel to Kingston, Jamaica, and fight Joe Frazier for the heavyweight championship of the world. Frazier, who beat Muhammad Ali. Frazier, who is considered by many the most dangerous heavyweight alive. Foreman will knock him down 6 times in 2 rounds. 6 times. The referee will stop the fight in the second round, not because Frazier is unconscious, but because he keeps getting up, and Foreman keeps putting him back down. And at some point, you have to protect a man from himself. But that's 6 months away. Right now, it's January 1973. Right now, George Foreman is in Yates Gym, Houston. Right now, he is preparing. And when George Foreman prepares, the whole gym feels it. There are maybe 15 people in Yates Gym on this particular Tuesday morning. A few other fighters working their own routines. 2 trainers, a sparring partner waiting his turn, hands already wrapped, headgear already on, looking like a man waiting for a bus he knows is going to run him over. A writer from Sports Illustrated, who got permission to observe the training session and is standing very carefully at the edge of the room where nothing can fall on him. A few local boxing figures who show up when Foreman trains, because watching George Foreman train is, in its own way, a sporting event. And in the back corner of the gym, sitting very quietly on a wooden bench near the door, reading something, is a man nobody has introduced. Small man. Asian. Maybe 5'7". Dark clothes. Quiet. Nobody has really noticed him yet. Nobody knows why he's there. He's just there. In the corner. Reading. Like he wandered in off the street and sat down, and nobody had the energy to ask him to leave. George Foreman is working the heavy bag. And when George Foreman works the heavy bag, nobody in the room is looking at anything else. Boom. 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 The chain holding the bag rattles with each impact. The exposed pipes overhead vibrate slightly. The concrete floor transfers the force of each punch through the soles of everyone's shoes. His trainer, Dick Sadler, stands to the side calling combinations, watching, adjusting. Every other person in the gym has slowed their own work to watch. Because this is what 217 pounds of coordinated explosive force looks like when it's pointed at something. After 12 minutes on the bag, 12 minutes at that intensity, which would hospitalize most professional athletes, Foreman stops, drops his hands, breathes hard, rolls his neck, looks around the room, and his eyes settle on the small man in the corner. George Foreman has excellent instincts. Always has. Part of what makes him exceptional is not just the physical gifts, the size, the power, the hands, but the way he reads a room, the way he processes people. He looks at this small man sitting quietly in the corner of his gym reading something, and something registers. This man doesn't belong here, not in a threatening way, not in a suspicious way. Just, this man is not a Houston boxing person, is not a trainer or a journalist or a gym regular, is not watching the training with the wide-eyed reverence that most visitors bring to Yates' gym when Foreman is working. He's just reading. Foreman walks over to Dick Sadler, keeps his eyes on the corner. "Who's that?" he says, low. Sadler glances over, shrugs. One of the guys let him in. Said he was in town for some movie meetings. Martial arts guy. Chinese. George looks at him again. The small man has not looked up from his book. "Martial arts," George says. Something in his voice. Not contempt exactly. More like, the word sounds funny to him. In this context, martial arts, in a boxing gym, in Houston, in January, he walks over. Now. The Sports Illustrated writer is watching this happen, and his pen is moving, even though he doesn't know what he's writing yet. The other fighters in the gym have slowed further. The sparring partner who was waiting his turn finds something very important to look at on the ceiling. George Foreman stops in front of the small man. The small man looks up from his book. "You know who I am," George says. Not a question. The small man looks at him for a moment. Steady. No nervousness. No rush to answer. "George Foreman," he says. 37 and 0. 34 knockouts. Olympic gold, 1,968. Fighting Frazier in Kingston in June. George blinks. "Once? That's right," he says. He studies the small man, reading him the way fighters read people, not the face, not the words, the body, the posture, the energy. This man's posture is interesting. Relaxed but not loose. Still but not stiff. The stillness of something coiled, not the stillness of something at rest. There's a difference. George Foreman, who has been reading bodies in gyms for 10 years, notices the difference. He decides to test something. He pulls up a wooden chair, turns it around, sits on it backward, arms crossed over the top. Casual, easy. His full size is visible from this position. Huge arms, enormous shoulders, 217 pounds of professional heavyweight, taking up space in the room. You do martial arts, he says. Wing Chun, the small man says. And my own system. George nods slowly. And you think martial arts can handle boxing? It's a statement more than a question. A very specific kind of statement. The kind that is actually a trap. The small man closes his book. I think fighting is fighting, he says. The system matters less than the person using it. George considers this. The gym has gone completely quiet. Every person in it is pretending not to listen. Every person in it is listening to every word. So you think, George says, choosing his words carefully, that a man your size, doing your style, could handle himself against a trained heavyweight. The small man looks at him. I think size is one variable, he says. Not the only one. George Foreman looks at this man, 140 pounds, street clothes, sitting on a bench in the back corner of his gym in Houston, and something happens in him that doesn't happen very often. He gets curious. How about we find out, he says. The gym reacts, not loudly, not dramatically, just a collective intake of breath, a subtle repositioning of every body in the room toward the ring. The Sports Illustrated writer's pen stops moving, and he looks up from his notebook for the first time in 20 minutes. Dick Sadler, who has seen everything in boxing, makes a face that might be concern and might be fascination and is probably both. The small man stands up. He is shorter than George Foreman by more than half a foot. He is lighter by 77 pounds. He is wearing street clothes and leather shoes in a professional boxing gym. He looks, standing next to George Foreman, like a before and after photograph where someone forgot to take the after. The sparring partner who was waiting for his turn quietly picks up his bag and finds somewhere else to be. Smart man, George's trainer, Dick Sadler, steps forward. George, he says. Low, controlled. George, to DD. George has seat controlled. George looks at him. Light work, George says. I just want to see something. Sadler looks at the small man, looks back at George. He has been in boxing since 1942. He has seen everything. His face says he is not sure he has seen this before. Light work, Sadler says finally. He looks at the small man. Sir, you understand light contact. Exhibition only. The small man nods. They get him some training gloves from the equipment rack. Too big for his hands. He puts them on without comment. Doesn't ask for hand wraps. Doesn't ask for headgear. Doesn't do any of the things a man preparing for 3 minutes in a ring with George Foreman should probably do. He just walks to the ring, gets in, and stands there. Dark trousers, street clothes, oversized borrowed gloves, standing in a regulation boxing ring across from a 217-pound undefeated professional heavyweight who is 6 weeks away from becoming the most feared man in the sport. The Sports Illustrated writer has moved closer. His pen is moving again. George Foreman settles into his stance. Now, you need to understand what George Foreman's stance looks like in January 1973. This is not the defensive, measured stance of a technical boxer. This is not Ali's upright dancing stance or Frazier's low-pressure forward stance. George Foreman stands like a force of nature stands, weight slightly forward, hands at comfortable height, the stance of a man who has never needed to hide behind technique because the technique is less important than the fact that when he hits you, you go down. He settles into it now, rolls his shoulders once, looks at the small man across the ring. The small man is standing with his weight centered. Feet, maybe shoulder width apart. Hands up but loose. No formal boxing stance, no dramatic martial arts pose. Just standing. Present. Available. Sadler is at ringside, arms crossed. The 15 people in the gym have gathered at the ring edges. Nobody is pretending to do anything else now. Go when you're ready, Sadler says. George moves forward. He starts easy. This is light work, he told Sadler. Light work. He's not here to hurt this man. He wants to see something. He throws a jab, maybe 40% power, more than enough to pop a civilian's head back and establish the reality of the situation. It doesn't land. The small man has moved. Barely. Just enough. The jab passes through air. George processes this. Resets. Throws again. The man isn't there again. Now, here's the thing about George Foreman and jabs not landing. It happens, even in real fights. Guys move. Guys slip. It happens. It doesn't mean anything yet. He throws a combination. Jab, cross, jab, controlled, but real. The cross alone, even at limited power, would stop most men. Nothing lands. George stops, stands there. The small man has moved through all three punches different directions, minimal movement each time, and is standing now slightly to George's right, at a slight angle, watching him. George turns to face him. In 10 years of boxing, in gyms all over America and internationally, in sparring with former champions and world-ranked heavyweights, and some of the best technical boxers on the planet, George Foreman has never thrown 3 punches in a row without the opponent doing something recognizable. Moving back, covering up, clinching, something. This man moved around them like they weren't there. George tries to identify what the man is doing. He can't. It's not boxing footwork, not karate, not anything he has a name for. It's fluid in a way that makes it almost invisible. You don't see the movement until it's already happened, and by then, the punch has already missed. He throws the right hand. His right hand. The punch that has ended 34 professional careers. Limited power, fine. But the mechanics are the mechanics. The path is the path. The small man slips inside it. Steps in, not back. Inside the arc of the punch, where it has no power. His hand, the borrowed glove, too big, awkward, comes up and stops. Touching George Foreman's chin. Light as a feather. George Foreman's chin. That nobody touches. The gym makes no sound. George steps back. The small man drops his hand. Steps back to distance. Expression unchanged. Not triumphant. Not performing. Just noting something. Filing it. George looks at him. Something is happening in George Foreman that has not happened before. Not fear. George Foreman doesn't feel fear in the conventional sense. Something more interesting than fear. Recalculation. His whole operating model, built over 10 years, validated by 37 fights, confirmed by 34 knockouts, says that when George Foreman throws his right hand, it lands, or the man moves away from it. Those are the two options. Move away or get hit. This man moved toward it, inside it, to where it had no power, and touched his chin. George moves forward again. More serious now. Not dangerous, this is still light work. This man is not a professional. He is not going to genuinely hurt him, but real. He wants to find the limit of this. He throws combinations, varied angles, body, head, body. He changes the rhythm. That's his primary adjustment when something isn't working. Disrupt the rhythm, make the timing unpredictable. The small man moves through them, not all of them perfectly. A couple George can see him adjusting mid-motion, correcting, recalculating. He's not a ghost. He's not supernatural. George is sure of this now, doing something specific, something technical, something learned and practiced and deeply understood. George tries to follow what it is. His boxing brain, which is excellent, tries to categorize it. He can't. Every time he thinks he's found, the pattern moves left, moves right, inside the punch. The man does something different. There is no pattern. Or rather, the pattern is only response. Pure response. Pure response. Whatever George does, this man responds to specifically and exactly, and nothing more. George throws the overhand right again. Same punch. Different setup. The man steps inside again. His hand comes up again. Stops. Same place. 1 inch from George's jaw. George looks at the glove touching the air in front of his face, looks at the small man behind it. The gym is completely still. George steps back. He takes his gloves off, drops them on the canvas. The small man watches him, waits. George walks to the corner, sits on the stool, breathes for a moment. Not from exertion, he's barely breathing hard. From something else, from the effort of trying to process something that doesn't fit. Dick Sadler comes up beside him. Quiet. You okay? Sadler says. George doesn't answer for a second. He touched me, George says. Sadler says nothing. Twice, George says. Same spot. I never saw either one coming. Sadler still says nothing. He is a man who understands when words are not the right response. George looks across the ring. The small man is standing in the neutral corner, waiting. Patient. No urgency. How does he do that? George says. The inside step. I throw the right, he goes in, not out. Sadler looks at the small man. Means he's not afraid of the punch, Sadler says slowly. He knows if he gets inside it, it can't hurt him. Has to know exactly where the power ends. Has to know exactly. George thinks about that. Has to be certain. Certain enough that when a 217-pound heavyweight throws a right hand, you don't flinch, don't hesitate, don't go back, you go forward. Into the punch, because you know precisely where it stops being dangerous. He's been inside that line before, George says. What? That feeling. He's felt it 1,000 times. He's completely comfortable there. Sadler looks at him. George gets up from the stool, crosses the ring. The small man watches him come. George Foreman is not a man who uses many words. He is economical in conversation the way he is economical in boxing. He uses what's needed and no more. He stands in front of the small man. Show me, he says. The small man looks at him. Show me what you did. The inside step. How you know where the power ends. A pause, long enough that the Sports Illustrated writer stops breathing. The small man nods. He spends 45 minutes with George Foreman in that ring. Not fighting, not demonstrating, teaching, showing the theory behind the movement, where the power in a punch lives and where it dies, how the body telegraphs before the hand moves, how to read the shoulder before the fist, the principle of using an opponent's committed force against its own direction. The difference between meeting force and redirecting force. George Foreman listens, and George Foreman, who has been in boxing since he was 16 years old, who has been trained by some of the best coaches in America, who has developed one of the most devastating heavyweight styles in the history of the sport, learns something. Dick Sadler watches from ringside, arms still crossed, his face unreadable. At one point, he uncrosses his arms and writes something in the small notebook he always carries. He doesn't do that very often. The other fighters in the gym have stopped pretending to train. They're watching the ring. Some of them are sitting down on benches, on equipment, on the floor. This is better than whatever they were planning to do this morning. The Sports Illustrated writer has filled 6 pages of his notebook. He doesn't use any of it in his article about the Foreman training camp. Some things you don't know how to explain. After 45 minutes, the small man stops, looks at George. That's the principle, he says. The application is yours to find. George nods, rolls the information around. You're not a boxer, George says. No. You've never fought professionally. No. George thinks for a moment. You could have hit me, he says. Those 2 times. You were inside. I had nothing set. You could have hit me. Yes. Why didn't you? The small man picks up his street jacket from the corner, shakes it out. Because hitting you wasn't the question I was trying to answer, he says. George watches him put the jacket on. What was the question? George says. The small man looks at him one more time. Whether size was the only variable, he says, and walks out of Yates' gym into the January Houston air. The gym stays quiet for a moment after he's gone. Then slowly, gradually, the sounds come back. Leather on leather. Speed bag rhythm. The shuffle of feet. The gym coming back to itself. George Foreman stands in the middle of the ring for a long moment. Looking at the door, Dick Sadler comes up to the apron. "Who was that?" he says. George thinks about the question. "Bruce Lee," he says finally. "He said his name was Bruce Lee." Sadler writes it in his notebook. 6 months later in Kingston, Jamaica, in the second round against Joe Frazier, when Frazier throws the left hook that has knocked down and beaten almost everyone it has ever touched. George Foreman doesn't go back. He steps inside it. Nobody who watches that fight understands why. The commentators don't mention it. The boxing analysts don't talk about it. It's a footnote in the greatest upset in heavyweight history. But Dick Sadler, watching from the corner, sees it and writes one word in his notebook: Lay.